CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw. Lots going on in politics this week. We will dive into a new report on prolific offenders and street crime, look at John Horgan's final polling numbers, and get into the latest in the BC NDP leadership race. If you're watching on CHEK TV, hi. Make sure you also subscribe to our podcast for a longer discussion and extra content. Okay. Let us get into it. We'll bring in the pod squad, Jeff Ferrier, Senior Vice President from Hill and Knowlton, and Jillian Oliver, BC Green Strategist Extraordinaire. Thank you both for being here as always. First up, a long-awaited report into tackling street crime, random assaults, thefts, property crime, prolific offenders, that kind of disorder we're seeing on the streets with people with untreated mental health and addictions crises, screaming and shouting and making people scared. And the government's heard that. They have tabled a report by experts this week that paints a pretty damning picture of the gaps in mental health and policing and courts and prosecution and housing and the toxic drug supply and on and on. This is going to take a lot of time, effort, and money to fix. There are 28 recommendations. Jillian, what do we make of the report and this issue and what's going to happen now?
Well, I think, like you said, it indicates that there's a lot of gaps in the system and it's not going to be something that's going to be solved overnight. I think, there's one of the biggest political things that's going to jump out of this is sort of the move towards more involuntary treatment programs. The report sort of lays out a British model that's been used, for people that are prone to at high risk of violence, and puts a lot of guardrails around the implementation of a system like this. This was the idea of involuntary treatment was an issue in the last couple of years. It's why the Premier said that he went to the snap election, and there's been this debate because mental health experts say that it often makes things worse. But when it intersects with prolific, repeat violent offenders, this report sort of opens the door to government exploring that again. So I think we can expect there to be a lot of debate and attention on that issue. There's lots else in it. Another thing that really jumped out for me is another report underscoring the need for safe supply. The authors say that part of what is contributing to this case is changes in the drug supply themselves, both people sustaining brain injuries from having been revived from drug poisoning so many times, as well as more prevalent use of drugs like methamphetamine that are linked to more instances of violence. So I think that's another big one for me that just underscores yet again that the government needs to move faster and broader towards a safe supply. And then, of course, like we've talked about many times on this show, many gaps in the treatment system, not enough voluntary care, not enough diverse forms of care for people with complex needs, and a lot of work to do on that angle as well.
Yeah, so much work. And the involuntary care thing that you mentioned, David Eby has obviously brought that up in his NDP leadership race. It has divided experts, the idea of giving people care against their will, but he's arguing it will save lives. This report talks about keeping people out of the criminal justice system to feed those addictions or mental health issues. So it is a contentious part of the report for sure. Jeff, what did you make of this?
I think my first takeaway was I was glad to see the province, the mayors, and these experts all on the same page. Every crime victim deserves our absolute best, and this is certainly a reminder that what's happening right now in communities across BC is not the best, and that there's lots more for all of us and government in particular to do to address this. For me, the headline is this: that there's a whole bunch of politicians out there in local elections and provincially and federally that are peddling that repeat offending is a prosecution and sentencing problem. And I read the report, and the report writers couldn't be more clear. those politicians are 100% wrong. All this talk we hear about catch and release. Catch and release is a great way to fish, but God save the fish. But when it comes to stopping crime, it's an argument that doesn't hold water. It's cynical politics of the right. It's folks who are using anger and fear, smart people who know a lot better, and yet advance this false narrative that the problem is that government is directing leniency for criminals. Let's be clear, and the report makes this clear, the Crown attorneys who prosecute are independent. The judges who rule and sentence are independent. Politicians have zero influence over these decisions. So maybe let's start by stop peddling simplistic solutions that focus on this, that folks like Doug Lepard, who is a veteran of the Vancouver Police and Transit Police, say is not the issue. The issue are the ones that you both raised and that Jillian talked about. It's systemic issues. It's getting tougher on the causes of crime. It's about people living in poverty. It's about people being discriminated against through systemic racism and being victimized in the health in the justice system that way. It's absolutely about the lack of adequate health supports to help people get from where they are, from where they need to be. So let's get focused on those issues and stop this silly, cheap, headline baiting, simplistic stuff that all you politicians on the right know it's going to help you in elections, but it's not going to help a single person on the street, and it's certainly not going to help victims of crime.
Well, that's a good segue into my rant on this about silly, cheap politics, which, Jeff, you say is on the right, but I'm going to argue was pretty expertly deployed by the BC government this week, asking experts to investigate this serious public safety issue. They come back with 28 recommendations. The government skips the ones quite literally marked urgent by the authors, and it cherry picks the one minor pilot program on case management that, surprise, surprise, just so happens to have been cut by the BC Liberals 10 years ago. And when Solicitor General Mike Farnworth is asked, hey, are you skipping the real work here to just try and embarrass your political opponents with this thing? He says, oh, no, this is not about embarrassing previous governments. And literally as he's saying that, the BC NDP's attack wing is putting out a press release blaming the entire prolific offender issue on the previous Liberal government and Kevin Falcon for cutting a pilot program 10 years ago. And who is quoted in it? Mike Farnworth, who is standing at a podium insisting he's not doing that while he's in a release doing that. And I came away, and I said this online, how dumb do New Democrats think we are with that strategy? Are they misreading the public mood here? Because I think the public and polls are showing us people aren't happy with the action on housing and healthcare and overdoses and street disorder. They're looking for solutions, and what the government was peddling this week seems to me, anyways, to be cheap political points rather than the hard work. And it tells me, and I'll let you jump in on this, that the NDP are pretty worried about Kevin Falcon and that the government is drifting a little bit with Horgan on the way out, and they're more focused on spin and political points and nonsensical gibberish on an issue like this than actually getting the work done. Jeff, I know you'd like to counter this, so go ahead. You have 4 seconds.
You're bringing you're completely wrong. Your take is hot garbage. I'm kidding. I think that this is less about Kevin Falcon and more about how does the government respond to a public that's concerned about public safety and repeat offenders, where almost all of the recommendations in an expert report talk about the need for long-term investment. And I'm no expert on what the emphasis is in reports, but they only bolded one section. And it was the section on long-term reductions in crime. I'm reading this, my eyes are going over here. Require that the provincial government invest significantly in all sorts of things. So if you're government and you're going to the public that has got big expectations about this report you're doing on an issue that they care about, long-term anything is as unsatisfying as celery. Government focused on what's doable now, right? So they can speak to, yes, we're committed to the long term, but we're going to do what we can now. There were 3 recommendations in the report that I read that were doable now. And so they picked those 3 to focus on. We're going to do these now, and we're going to go to Treasury Board to focus on the rest. So I think it's less about Kevin Falcon And, clearly they were trying to score points against him. And if you asked them, they would probably say, we saw it in lots of media. It's on your podcast. You're talking about it. So it's repeated. So they're probably happy about it. But, from a communications perspective, it's more about how do we show that we give a darn about this and that we're going to do something about it right now and not just punt the ball down the road.
Yeah. Jillian, I also said online, like, this idea that maybe the NDP government needs to start acting like it has a majority, which it does, and start kind of coming up with some solutions rather than politicking all the time. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're largely right. I think that the government used this tactic really effectively early on, after they were first elected in 2017. But it was a very different time. I think there was a lot of leftover resentment towards the Liberals. It was really fresh in people's minds, and the example that comes to mind is the way that David Eby used ICBC and really expertly sort of set up the story, which was, true, about how the Liberals had bungled ICBC's finances, created the famous dumpster fire imagery around that was really effective. And I think, we saw them use this framing, even when they announced that they were going ahead with Site C, they were really expertly communicated that, they didn't want to be in this situation. It was the Liberals who had put them there. And, I think that was really effective for them for many years. But now that they're sort of, been reelected, it's 5 years down the line, I think that's sort of starting to wear a little thin. You kind of start to hear anecdotally from people that they're sort of tired of the 16 years of Liberals, like, don't tell us about what the Liberals did, tell us what you're going to do for us, kind of thing. I think that it's been a little bit of a belated realization that the public has sort of moved on what kind of messages they're receptive to, and the media as well. So I think that maybe this was a little bit blunt. I think that there's a way that they could still sort of tell the story of the systemic failings under the Liberal government without it seeming like they're also trying to, evade responsibility. Yeah,
I think that's a fair point. Yeah. The last one on ways, there are ways they could have done it that was far less blunt. For example, they could have gotten members of that committee that was disbanded 10 years ago and had them and said to them, look, if you want for this to happen, be funded by us, why don't you get out there and tell the story of what it did and create some public awareness about what it did so that we can go out and just say this is a good idea and we're going to do it. And then you're able to, tell that story of the other side of the political spectrum and the criticisms you want to make it without having to put out a press release at the very same time that you're saying that you're not going to make political hay over it. That's a fair point, Jillian.
And it's not like the pilot project is not useful. I mean, it has shown to reduce recidivism, but at the same time, it only costs $120,000 and is 10 years old. And it's hard to imagine that the solution to this systemic crisis is $120,000 a year, something that no one's even mentioned in the NDP opposition or the NDP government in the last decade. Great, bring it back, but to pin it all on Falcon for canceling it, as the NDP did in their release, saying he's put us a decade behind, I think you'd have to be pretty dumb to believe that spin, which I found a little bit galling from the government. Anywho, let's flip around to the other side of that, which is public polling from Angus Reid this week showing people are very happy with John Horgan. What? They may not be happy with the government's progress on certain issues. We've seen other polls that show on issue-based criteria, they don't think government has done enough. But John Horgan as a person and as a premier is leaving office now 5 years with a median approval rate of 54% since 2017. That's extraordinary. To put that in perspective, Christy Clark never cracked 50%. Gordon Campbell did once, but he ended his career at 9%. NDP premiers in the 90s tanked. I don't think we've seen any premier with this consistently high polling in 40 to 50 years. And I mean, it's extraordinary. And I guess the question is, Jillian, we'll start with you. What does it mean for the NDP government as Horgan leaves? And we wrestle with the issue of how can people be upset about lack of progress, but overwhelmingly happy with the premier presiding over that?
I think a lot of it comes down to Horgan's personal appeal and how expertly his team, sort of introduced him to the public and kind of, did that in a way that was, fairly authentic, that made people really feel like they connected with him, that they knew him as a person, and that they trusted him. I think he'll continue to be an asset to the government. I expect, as long as his approval ratings are this high, he'll continue to sort of be a figure kind of supporting the work of an NDP government, assuming it doesn't radically depart from his sort of brand and vision. But yeah, I also think it's a reminder for the team of the incoming leader that does take a lot of work. When Horgan was running in 2017, he was relatively unknown. He did have negative brand associations. I think for more sort of intellectual, like policy geek type leaders like David Eby, if he becomes premier, that kind of like, PR, public persona politics can feel challenging to sort of figure out how to do it in an authentic and comfortable way, which can, then backfire. So it can become quite stressful if that's not your wheelhouse. But I think it really underscores how important it is and that, you need to give it serious thought in order to accomplish the things that you want to accomplish.
Some people look down on the idea of your public image, Jillian. You just touched on that, that it doesn't, you don't need to work on it because that's part of the politics you don't like. John Horgan managed to turn his authentic image into this powerful force, Jeff. By choosing to retire, he also leaves in this incredible position, whereas usually premiers get, they lose or they go through, they get knifed by their backbench as their popularity declines. So he has this 5-year legacy of unprecedented popularity from start to end, Jeff.
Yeah, it's a memo to other politicians. This is how you want to do it. Don't hold on too long. Get out at the height of your popularity and what people think about you. 54% median, 51% right now. Getting back to our last topic, just tangentially, I don't think people are tuning out John Horgan. I don't think people are tuning out the BC NDP. I don't think it's all about his personality. I think it's a lot about his personality. I think it's also about people connecting with the approach and the values that the government has brought to bear over the last 5 years. It's balanced, it's reasonable, but it's focused on making life better for people. And this was it's a big transformation for John Horgan. I remember jousting with people back in the day about Hulk Horgan and how he was, the angry politician guy who was negative about everything. And I talked to him recently, and he said this job is so much easier when you just ask. Like, he had a moment right before he became premier, where he realized, like, if I make this all about how does this affect people, and I make that like my guiding North Star, I'll be okay, and this job will be easy. And I need to do a better job doing the weeds at my place, and there's a fence that I've been putting off building that I need to get done. But folks still like me because they're like, he's despite his failings on the yard work, he's committed to the cabin. He's committed to the family, and he's going to make mistakes. But overall, I can be behind what he's doing. And so I think that's the legacy that John Horgan leaves. And what makes it interesting now and topical right now is we have a leadership race going on where one candidate is we're going to build on the legacy, and another one is that legacy is terrible and we need to change the way we're doing things completely. So interesting dynamics. I know which one I would choose if I were running a campaign. But I'm not, thank goodness.
Well, we'll have a larger discussion on the podcast about the ongoing NDP leadership race. But Jillian, close us off on that issue of, we have probes and investigations going on with one campaign, Anjali Appadurai, who wants a radically different direction for the party. You have David Eby running from the Horgan cabinet, who's hoping the popularity of Horgan is actually the popularity of the NDP and its policies. Put all of that together for us and kind of sketch out where we are in the leadership race right now and what it sort of means for the future of the New Democrats with these public popularity polls for a premier who's leaving and no one's quite sure what it means.
Yeah, well, I think like Jeff said, it's two very different visions and theses of where the party needs to go. I think it's kind of funny because the EB campaign has been quite quiet. I think they had this one strategy to come out of the gate with all the endorsements and sort of scare anyone off from running, but that only works if everyone is scared off from running, and it didn't happen, and it kind of felt like they didn't have a next step planned. So it's going to be interesting to see how they gain momentum. He said today that we're going to see some policy announcements coming. I think those are going to have to be really exciting and capture people's imagination to sort of get the campaign back on track. But, assuming that Paterai doesn't get disqualified, we're still going to have debates. We're still, I think, 3 weeks or so away from that. So there's still lots more to go for them to sort of flesh out their arguments and get into it a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Jeff has lots to say on this, but you're going to have to subscribe to the podcast to get it. We got more discussion about this on the TV show. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for the panel for being here. Remember, there's old episodes of Political Capital on CHEK Plus, a free app. And we are here each and every Sunday for your viewing pleasure. Thanks so much. We will see you next week on Political Capital.